Hi guys, my name's Doug. Welcome to My Messy Garage. In today's video, we're going to be installing a heavy-duty bumper on a 2019 Expedition Wide Track SE. This is my super wide Expedition over here. You can see the heavy-duty bumper. Over here we have the 20-inch wide SE model, and you can see that it doesn't have a solid rear bumper. This is the bumper assembly that we'll be putting on. It's a nice heavy extruded aluminum that is designed to fit around the mechanism of the tunnel. There's grooves machined into it, etc. There are heavy-duty nuts that fit into the extrusion through the tunnel. They act like locating dowels, and they transfer the pulling force from the hitch into the tunnel of the snow machine. At the back, this black plate attaches where the tab hitch originally attached on the machine, and provides a nice little platform with a mounting holes to put a conventional 2-inch receiver hitch on underneath. Follow along while we mount this on the snow machine. Included in the kit is a printout of the instructions. If your kit for some reason doesn't come with the instructions, they are available from, I believe it's instructions.brp.com, and you just have to do a search for the product number that you have. We're going to have to remove a bunch of bits and pieces off of this machine prior to mounting the heavy-duty bumper on there. We have to remove the tab hitch, we have to remove these trim end caps and reflectors, and we have to at least loosen the snow flap, as the new hitch will slide in over top of all that. The snow flap, of course, stays on the machine once the heavy-duty hitch is installed, but we'll have to make some minor modifications to make sure that everything fits. First step in the instructions is to remove 8 screws. We've got 1, 2, these 6, and 2 more on the sides. I guess there's more than 8. Remove times 8, it says. I guess I can't count on the instructions. Well, let me get some tools. We'll start pulling that apart. Okay, the Torx fasteners across the snow flap are T20. I have an impact gun here. Just buzz these out. Next step, we'll pop the protective caps off of the nuts that hold the tab hitch in place. The tab hitch is held on by, looks like about a M8 bolt, and we need a 13 mil to remove the nuts. And the nylock nuts are just a little bit too much for my M12 impact gun. Let me grab a ratchet, take a standard ratchet, and the hitch comes off. It's a little tricky to get the end off of the snow flap, just because it fits around in several different angles, but then the snow flap comes off. The next step on the instructions is to remove the nut plate from in behind, just so we can remove the 2 bolts that attach the upper part of the tab hitch. And then we remove the lower bolts from in behind. On the side of the tunnel, both sides we have reflectors, and both those reflectors need to be removed so that we can slide the hitch down. So to pop these reflectors off, we just kind of get the knife started in behind and give it a little bit of a pry, and they pop right off. And we have 3 bolts on each side that kind of hold this back end extrusion in place that need to come out. Although I'm not entirely sure why we need to take the top ones off. I don't particularly like the way that shifted when that last bolt came out. I think I'm going to put it back in just to kind of hold everything together. My recollection of doing this is that we don't need to worry about these top bolts at all, because the lower bumper goes down below where those bolts are. If we find that we need to remove those front upper bolts to get the bumper installed, we can always remove them at a later time. The owner of this machine has mounted the axe holder. These are for the Gen 4 Rev chassis, and it's an accessory for the 2020 and newer machines. However, they're kind of a universal application, and he's actually installed one on his Articat Bearcat. They're a fairly nice axe holder. I'm thinking of getting one for my machine as well. But unfortunately, where it's sitting at the moment, it is in the way. So I'm going to have to get in behind here. I believe it's the some more Torx 20 fasteners and drop the axe holder off of there. Before we remove these off the machine, a neat little feature. This is actually a Linq accessory, so they cam lock off. There's your Linq fastener, and you're left with just basically a Linq mount. Held on with 4 self-tappers that have a T20 head on them. Unfortunately, due to the design of the heavy-duty bumper, we're going to have to find a different location to mount these. After a little bit of fighting, we finally got the last screw out of this. It's inconvenient in where this is mounted because you're up near the top idler of the track, and the track is very close to the tunnel. So now we've got that out of there, wipe the worst of the dust off, and we're ready to slide the bumper in place, see how it fits. The next step on the instructions says to back these 4 nuts off just a little bit. And again, between Loctite and nylock nuts, there's way too much tension on these bolts to be able to do it with my little impact. And that gives us just a little bit of play in this plate. Now we got a little bit of slack there. One item that I haven't seen mentioned in the instructions, but I want to do before we put this on, there are plastic caps that go on the front ends so that we're not pushing a blunt aluminum extrusion down the side of the tunnel. I imagine these are part of the final installation in the instructions. I just haven't seen that step yet, but ideally it'll make for a much nicer installation. We look here, you'll see there's a taper on one side and it's flat on the other. The taper is going to go down against the bottom lip of the tunnel. Likewise, if you look at the extrusion, you can see there's a matching bevel. We don't want to get too carried away pounding on these. Just a little bit of a wiggle, and they go right down in place. Now we have a plastic front end to push down the length of the tunnel as opposed to a sharp extrusion. Okay, we've reached the point where we need to tack this onto the machine. Essentially, we've got the two bolts that will eventually tie the back end of the bumper into the extrusion that runs across the back of the machine. And we'll just start these in here, kind of hand tight. The idea being there that now locates the rest of the holes. Along the sides of the bumper, including this rear hole, there are 4 holes on each side. And the way they work is we drill a hole in the tunnel that receives this nut that goes through. It uses the outer surface as a locating. It ties the extruded bumper into the tunnel, or then the Torx head bolt goes in and ties everything together. And this hardened steel nut is what is transferring the pulling into the tunnel. Some other parts that we need to take into consideration are the 2-inch receiver. This needs to get bolted with the doubler plate tying forward and the receiver hitch going backward. While we don't need to put those in at the moment, we need to be aware that they will have to go in before we're finished. So we have here is a transfer punch, and they come in different sizes. This is the one that we're going to be using, and the way it works is that this is a parallel or a straight bar that slips into a bolt hole, locating the center tip in the middle of the hole, and you just give it a tap with a hammer and it gives you your center punch that you're guaranteed is going to be in the middle of your bolt hole. If you use a standard hole punch or a standard center punch, what you're going to do is you're going to drift up or down, or it's not going to be in the center and you're going to have trouble lining things up. The transfer punch is by far the best way to transfer the center point of an existing hole onto a surface in behind. The way this works, we just insert it into the existing bolt hole, get it lined up relatively square, and give it a whack with the hammer. You want to make sure that the bumper is down where it's supposed to be and also in all the way. And now we remove the bumper. And you can see we've got a nice solid center punch where we need to drill the hole. So we're going to do a pilot drill hole here. It's a, I don't know, 5/32 drill bit thereabouts. We'll drill out the 6 holes that we need to do, 3 on each side, and then we'll come along with a step drill and drill it out so that the barrel nut that I showed you a little while ago fits in and engages with the bumper. You're going to notice that the first part of this goes very quickly. The outer shell of the tunnel is aluminum. In behind is a plate that runs the length of the tunnel that these tie-down hooks are actually part of, and they're a powder-coated steel. So it takes a little bit of effort to get the drill bit to go through the steel part as opposed to the aluminum. Go through the aluminum. And now we're through the steel. And when you're drilling this front hole, you want to be careful. There's kind of a serrated edge on the running board here that I guess is used to scrape snow off your boots. And if you run your knuckles across that when you're finally punching through that hole, it's probably going to hurt a little bit. Let me get the other 3 holes on the other side drilled, and I'll bring you back when we're ready to start opening them up. The next step is to drill out the holes so that they will receive these barrel nuts, and we got a step drill to do that with. And we don't want to drill through, like this is a fairly thick assembly with the 2 layers, so I think we're going to have to come in from the back side now to drill it out to the final size. And that's what we do to get the rest of the bolts mounted. I'll bring it back when I got the rest of the holes drilled. You don't need to watch me drill 5 more holes, and we'll show you the next step to mounting the bumper. We've got the holes drilled in the tunnel out to the proper size, got them cleaned up a little bit, and everything's looking good there. But before we can start bolting things back onto the machine, we've got to clean up the snow flap. These trim pieces at the end no longer work, and I believe we're going to have to adjust this notch in the middle a little bit. So we just take a utility knife and essentially cut down the hinge. Careful not to cut the operator, of course, and we clean up. Looking further at the instructions, the having to cut this or modify this part of the snow flap is on models that were originally equipped with the J-hook style. The J-hook, of course, is considerably narrower than the original tab style hitch. Now that we've got all of our adjustments made, the snow flap just goes back on the machine, lines up with the holes in that doubler plate that's in behind. We'll just start a couple of the screws in here, get things held up in place, then we'll put the rest of the bolts to it. So we've got these 6 screws, or I guess they're technically a bolt, started into the nut plate, and we'll just come along with the impact. Be very careful. These are fairly small screws, and of course we're dealing with torque. So we don't want to put too much jam into them, tightening with the Torx or tightening with the impact gun, because it will strip them off fairly easily. The next step in the instructions is to put the little end caps in. Well, we already did that because I didn't want to damage anything when I was sliding this on and off. And now it's time to slide it on. Got it slid into position. Start our end bolts in again. These bolts are going into the extrusion that runs across the back of the tunnel. And now we need to take our barrel nuts and our bolts and bolt that on. There's different lengths of these bolts in the kit. These are going to be a shorter one because the barrel is going to come into the backside of the bumper. So there's not actually very much that needs to be on there. Reach up in behind. And that is started into the hole. Let me get the rest of these bolts started. I'll bring you back and show you the next step in the assembly. We've got the bolts all snugged up on the other side. These are all started. I just need to get a wrench on the back side of them and snug them down. A little bit tricky, the front ones here. One problem I have is the track is where it comes down from the top idler to the drivers at the front is just almost in line with the back side of the bolt here. It's not going to cause any interference issues once we get everything all assembled, but it's just a matter to get on the back side there. I got to push the track up, we'll say half an inch. It's not a big deal, but just one of those things that makes this less than a super easy project. Take a wrench, we put it on that barrel nut on the back side and snug it up. Snug up this back bolt. Don't want to overdo it because it's just threaded into the aluminum extrusion across the back. And now we'll get these front two bolts snugged up. I'll bring you back when we're ready to start assembling the receiver hitch on the back of the unit. This is the hardware that used to attach the tab hitch to the extrusion across the back of the machine. This doubler plate gets reused. However, we replace it with newer hardware. The other item that we have that we're installing here, and the main reason that we're doing the heavy-duty rear bumper, is to get this 2-inch receiver. So this has to be bolted up underneath at the same time that we tighten everything down here at the back. So a big heavy-duty doubler plate goes up in there. We'll take and drop one of those bolts through and throw a nut on it just to kind of keep everything lined up. Now we take our much longer bolts, and we seem to have a slight misalignment here. That's likely why they had us loosen everything off, just to make everything easier to get the bolts through. What I have here is, it's actually a center punch, traditional center punch, but it has a nice taper on it. So I'll push that down through, get everything lined up, and the bolts slip in very nicely. Now we have the doubler that went on the back side for the conventional hitch. It goes back up in place. I believe it fits in like this. And then we put our shoulder nuts on, came with the bumper assembly. Before we can snug all these bolts up, we need to get the receiver hitch bolted under here, because we need to have that the heavy duty hitch plate sandwiched in between the receiver portion and the bumper plate. And the easiest way to do that is to get it bolted up in place. Interestingly, the receiver hitch did not come with bolts to attach to the rear face of the heavy-duty bumper. It appears we use the bolts that came with the bumper. If you were installing the receiver hitch at a much later date than when you installed the heavy-duty bumper, it's entirely possible that you could be missing some hardware if you don't keep track of your extra parts and pieces. It's kind of a gotcha to keep an eye out for. Again, we have just a little bit of a misalignment. And as you can see, the second bolt slips in quite nice. Now we've got some nuts that go on the back side, if I can avoid dropping them on the floor. So we made a little bit of a minor hiccup here, and it appears that we have to reuse these longer bolts that originally held the tab hitch in place, rather than using the black anodized bolts that came with the hitch assembly, because you'll notice we are short 2 bolts at the back. I'll have to kind of wiggle things around here and get these bolts to come back out. The doubler plate has a square hole in it that captures the carriage, the square carriage bolt, and then we slip it back in on the back side of the tunnel, and our second bolt. And while we would probably prefer to use the new lock nuts, I think the originals will work just fine. So we're getting to the final few bolts that have to go in here, and we've got these nice long bolts that bolt into the back. We've got the original tab hitch that was on the back of the snow machine. The owner, however, picked up this absolutely beautiful tab hitch accessory from BRP for a couple $100. And it's a nice hitch. I don't know about a couple $100, but it's a nice hitch. And the reason he did that is that he forgot that the tab hitch mounted on the back of the fancy heavy-duty bumper. However, we've been looking at it, and it actually will work out better if we install this tab hitch here. The length of the bolt is obviously intended to go through the tab hitch and the multiple layers. Otherwise, the bolt sticks out quite a bit further on the inside. So that is the approach we're going to take. His plan is to use that tab hitch on another project and switch the mounting plate over from the tab hitch to a J-hook. He does have a couple of trailers that use J-hooks, so having another J-hook in the stable will be well worth his efforts. These bolts inserted in here, get the nuts on them, and we'll get everything snugged up. One little problem with tightening these top bolts on the tab hitch at the back here is that the nut is up fairly close to this, or to the underside of this top plate, and I can't get the box end of the wrench onto the nut. Now that we've got the tab hitch installed, I'll tighten up the 4 side bolts that we slacked off, just for to provide a little bit of adjustment when we were assembling. And now we have the 4 top bolts that need to be adjusted, and of course, for whatever reason, BRP can't use the same size bolts that they use everywhere else. It actually is a smaller T40. We've got a heavy-duty rear bumper and 2-inch receiver hitch installed on a 2019 Expedition SE. A few little snags we hit along the way, nothing too major. I've done this job before on my Expedition super wide, 24 inches wide track. Really doesn't make a whole lot of difference to how this goes in. One of the big things that really made this job go easy was using the transfer punch instead of a standard center punch. What you could do is take electrical tape, wrap it around the tip or around the shaft of the center punch, build it up so that it fits perfectly into the hole, maintains center, and use that as your drill point. Also, using the step drill definitely made the job go very easy. Another little snag that we hit was that the fancy new receiver doesn't quite clear the bottom of the tab hitch by using the original tab hitch the way we had. This does not fit into the receiver. A little bit of clearancing and should fit in no problem at all. Other than that, the job went very smoothly. I'm very happy with how everything's turned out here. Looks great. There's no major damage done to the machine, and it should provide very good service. Thanks a lot for checking out this video. Please remember to like, subscribe, throw me a comment. Let me know if you like what I'm doing. If you don't like what I'm doing, tell me what I can do better. We'll catch you in the next mess.